So when you look at these images, what comes to mind? If you had to associate some sort of feeling or emotion with them, what would it be? What about here? Or here? Take a couple moments to think about what is being conveyed through these images. So you all just took part in a small experiment that shows the influence contextual framing has on our perception. So it seems like a lot of people, when they saw the first set of images, thought of happiness, with the second set, sadness, and with the third group, hunger. I think often when you see someone sitting with an empty plate and a fork and a knife in hand, that's kind of indicative of being hungry and ready for dinner. So contextual frames are built up through real-world experiences, whereby particular scenarios are experienced and subsequently influence how we perceive and predict the social world. Many social psychological studies have shown that when context is not taken into consideration, large errors in attribution judgments can often be made. So context really helps us prescribe meaning to a certain scenario or situation. And the mechanism by which we do this is through attribution. So what exactly are attributions? In the field of psychology, they are very important to take into account. Attributions are the reason a person gives for why an event happens. We have an example of maybe a common attribution situation that people here maybe have experienced behind me. There are two types of attributions, situational and dispositional. Situational attributions are based on the idea that a person's actions are due to the situation that they are in, where dispositional attributions are based on the idea that a person's actions are due to their disposition or personality. Oftentimes, context is the key to leading people to make these important distinctions in interpersonal situations. So now I want to pivot a little bit and introduce you to two individuals living in Russia in the early 1900s. The man on the left is famous Soviet filmmaker Lev Kuleshov, and on the right is Tsarist actor Ivan Mazukind. Nearly a century ago, Soviet filmmaker Lev Kuleshov demonstrated that the manipulation of context can alter an audience's perceptions of an actor's facial expressions, thoughts, and feelings. This was especially relevant in the days of early cinema, when sound, coloration, special effects was limited or non-existent, and being overly facially expressive was considered a positive. Even now, the most coveted Academy Awards usually relate to acting, and while Kuleshov thought that acting was very important, he had a hunch that it was the setting, the context that really conveys the meaning. He thought the best way to study this was through montage, keeping the emotional response fixed, but instead editing the context. So here we have an example of this initial very famous study. The implication is that viewers bring their own emotional reactions to this sequence of images, and then attribute those reactions to the actor, investing his neutral face with their own feelings. So when he initially showed these images to a population, he asked, hey, what do you think the actor's feeling? What's he trying to express? Do you think he's doing a good job? And the audience raved. When they saw the first image, they said, he's doing such a good job showing his hunger. He really wants that bowl of soup. When they saw the second image, they, raved about how expressive he was being, his sadness for his lost daughter lying in the coffin. And the third image in the early 1900s in Russia was considered to be very promiscuous, having a woman reclining in a settee in such a way. And they really attributed a lot of sexual arousal, sensuality, things like that. So what they didn't realize that in all of these situations, the actor's face was exactly the same. It was the contextual imagery that was changing. And this has aptly been named as the Kuleshov effect. So as you can imagine, this phenomenon has fascinated many people over the years. Famous director Alfred Hitchcock was so influenced by the Kuleshov effect that he did some editing experiments of his own, incorporating the manipulation of context effects into his 1954 film, Rear Window, starring Jimmy Stewart. And in the realm of scientific research, as you can see, many psychology research groups have worked on this research from a variety of different perspectives, looking at the neurological basis, cognitive influences, social or interpersonal effects, and behavior manipulation. So with all of this work and effort built around the importance of context effects, based on one experiment done in Russia in the early 1900s, I thought it was time to take a closer look at the Kuleshov effect. So we designed a study that had two primary goals. The first was adapted replication of the Kuleshov effect via manipulating context and with some more modern imagery to be used. The second had to do with examining gender differences between the neutral-faced actor. Will it matter if they're male or female? So we have an example of our trials here. So participants in this study saw 10 short videos, 5 videos pulling for a combination of both complex and basic emotions, with 5 neutral videos interspersed throughout. We included videos that pulled for 5 emotions: enjoyment, sadness, neutrality, sexual arousal, and aggression. Participants would watch the 3-second video clip. Here we see one of neutral stimuli. And then they would see a neutral-faced actor appear. That actor would either be male or female, depending on what group they were randomly assigned to. They were then asked to rate on a Likert scale from 1 to 5 the degree to which they believed the actor was expressing a variety of different emotions. The result of this study was actually very exciting. It showed the Kuleshov effect being observed, with significant differences existing in specific emotion conditions for the target face. So for each of the clips, it was found that the participants rated the target emotion significantly higher than the alternative emotions. Most interestingly, we discovered that 2 gender differences were observed, as participants were more likely to rate male faces as expressing higher levels of enjoyment and aggression. One possible explanation for this unanticipated variance in response is the gender trait view. This is a perspective that's been used to explain the societal stereotypes that generally portray men as being more aggressive, defensive, and uninhibited, and women as being more compassionate and caring and reserved. So in summary, using dynamic stimuli, strong evidence for the Kuleshov effect, and intriguing differences relating to the target face's gender were found. But what does this mean for us? I think in any sort of scientific or empirical research, it's important to step back and really think about the broader implications for what we're studying. So what do a bunch of faces and contextual imagery have to do with us or our everyday lives? And that comes down to one very important thing: emotional awareness. This is one of 3 key elements of emotional intelligence, a construct that I'm sure many of you here are familiar with. It's defined as the ability to identify and manage your own emotions and the emotions of others. It's a social experience, an interpersonal give and take. We assume in certain scenarios that people are feeling a certain way. On your birthday, people may assume you're happy to be receiving presents and cake and all of the fun that comes along with celebrating that special day. In an important and quiet exam setting, people may assume that the students are very stressed and anxious and nervous. So let's think back to the images I showed at the beginning of this talk. When we see a bunch of people smiling and laughing together, we think that means they're all happy. If we see someone sitting alone in the dark with their head down, we think that that means they're sad. But what if this isn't always the case? So earlier this year, a news report from the Princeton Review came out saying that Vanderbilt students are the happiest in the nation. Of all the colleges in the United States, our happiness levels are the absolute highest. So this is a great honor to have, but we know it isn't always the case. College is hard, and the pressures of succeeding often take a mental and emotional toll on students. A recent on-campus poll showed that 40% of Vanderbilt students believe that others will think less of them for receiving mental health treatment. These perceptions lead to stigma being discriminated against, judged, and devalued as a person. So being able to step out of the setting we're placed in and look at the specific individuals we might be interacting with, friends, classmates, roommates, is of the utmost importance. It's okay to not always be the happiest person, even if you are in an environment that emphasizes that as the norm. We can't make assumptions based on the context. We have to focus on the individual, and through that, we can inspire greater levels of caring and understanding.